I'm JD. Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. Please hit like. Here today we're going to make a balance staff for vintage size 16 pocket watch. We're using blued steel, specially tempered steel, as our stock material, and I'm setting it up in a Bowley lathe. Here I'm just facing off the part, getting ready to grave it. I use carbide gravers. I take the original balance staff with the broken pivot and I make some marks so I can properly size the diameters and the lengths of the various collars that I've got to cut to. So here I'm looking at the first part I need to friction fit on is in fact the balance, and the balance has a 13 millimeter hole, and I'm cutting the stock material down to 13 millimeters, and I'm using a tapered cut. That way I can fit the balance on the far right hand side or upper right hand side, as you can see, and then keep tapering the cut as I work my way up to that collar. So I'm just working it and measuring it with my deuxième gauge. It's quite quick to measure, and it's friction fit, so I have to pay attention to the width of the arms of the balance as well. That makes the collar has to be able to fit the balance, plus there has to be a little material left over in order for you to have to be able to rivet the balance on. So here I'm just removing material so I can fit that, and I'm trying to get that first collar the right size. And what I did was I cut right to that collar and then I worked the collar. So here I'm still trying to fit it. As you can see, there's a lot of trial fits for friction fit. It takes a long, that's why it takes such a long time to make a balance staff. The other thing is I've got to face off the rim of that collar so it lies flat, so when the balance arms are touching the rim, they're in fact lying flat. So here I continue to fit it. Now I don't want it to go all the way on because it's friction fit. I want it to go sort of halfway down the collar, and I'm estimating how much material I might need, and once I've got a good estimate, I remove all the material on the outside so I know exactly where that collar is. And here I'm measuring it by holding the arms on the outside of that collar to see how much material do I really need to rivet this thing on. In fact, the rivet wasn't really necessary because the friction fit was so good on this. I did a good job doing that. So the next component I'm going to fit on here is the hairspring collet. So I've got to measure that. And the hairspring collet measured 9 millimeters. A bit tricky to do with the hairspring collet. It does have the ability to actually, see, I'm facing this off here because I want this to be pretty much flat, and where I'm trying to make a groove in here, and this enables me to create a rivet. So the groove allows me to rivet that on with a round stake and then with a flat stake. And I have to make sure, as you can see, the other side, this collar is in fact flat, and there's no, and to do that you kind of go inside just a bit on the collar. Now here I'm just doing some fine tuning here with this particular, trying to remove just a little tiny bit of material. So I've got, this is a 2 millimeter graver I'm using, and it's a carbide graver, so it's good, really good for close work. So here's the hairspring. I'm trying to leave enough material so I can actually have the hairspring friction fit on here. And like I said before, I need to get inside there so I can create rivet material. And I'm measuring and cutting and measuring and cutting. You can see why this is a long job. You're going to spend about 4.5 hours making one of these because you're not only setting all the tools up and the lathe and everything, but all the measuring. That slid on a little bit too good, I think, and I marked it, and I think that it'll work, but I might close the collet just a bit. I do have a tool that I use for closing the collet. So here I just put, I used a marker there to ink where I was, so I knew where I could cut the material off and not worry about reducing the diameter and having the actual hairspring collet be too loose. So now I'm cutting the other side and measuring with the existing staff. And I also know there's a requirement for a slight taper on that collar that I'm making, and I'm making that taper now. But the I'll say left hand side, it's left bottom, but we'll just say left for now. So I know I've got to remove enough material at some point to put on the roller table, and the roller table is absolutely friction fit, and there's almost no way of correcting a problem if you cut too much material away from the roller table. But I'm doing the main collar here, and I'm calling them collars. If you got a better name for it, let me know. But I'm just trimming it away here, and it's more of an aesthetic thing. It doesn't have to be angled like that. There's no advantage for it to being angled, but I decided I'd just copy the original staff here. The original staff I tried to re-pivot. That's why it's got these funky looking pivots on the end, and it was my mistake. The tool you just saw I use was just estimating the length from the base of that main collar that I'm cutting to where the bottom jewel would be, and so I know how much material I actually need to have on the bottom. So the problem I had before was the balance arms were hitting the bridge for the pallet fork, and I want to make sure that my measurements don't cause that. So here I'm cutting away material that I know I don't need. My pivot won't be down that end, and I'm using a file, and it's a tapered file, which is really good for that. I'm just using the same file to clean off the end, so I'm facing that off. And then I'm just going to work this down a bit. I know I can go right up to where that next collar is, and that's the one that's holding the hairspring collet. So I'm just sharpening that staff up and comparing it in length. And there's the balance staff I made before, where it was not long enough on the bottom half and causing the arms to hit the bridge that's used to hold the pallet fork in place. So I had to make a new staff because of that, and I didn't realize that would be a problem. So this is the new staff I'm making. So I'm giving it a clown hat here. I'm not absolutely sure where that pivot's going to end up, like how long it's going to have to be, but I'm going to finish the pivot off just so I can cut the other side of the balance. So I'll cut it away as soon as I remove some material, but I want to finish that pivot off while this balance is staked up, well, it's chucked up nicely. Now I'm using an Arkansas stone, which I really like. It takes material off really well, and it's smooth as hell. So here I'm just getting rid of some material on the back end, and I got to make sure I leave enough for the lower pivot. That was my problem before, and so I'm just cutting it all. I can cut it right down to that lower rim you see just to the right of where I'm cutting. I can cut it right down to that, and I'm trying to cut it down to make sure I've got close to or over 7 millimeters, because it's a 7 millimeter shaft that I need to, there it is there, that was a quick look, 7 millimeter shaft I need to fit on for the roller table. So I know I can cut it down a bit more, and I'm taking advantage of it being chucked up nicely here to cut that. And you try to do as much with the balance in a single cut without having to take the material out of the lathe. That way it's true, and you don't have to worry about the part not being true. So here I'm measuring where I think I need to cut this off at the end of the day. So I got it down to a peak, and I put a little bit of Rodico on the end, and that way when I file this thing off, it's going to fall onto my hand, and the Rodico is going to help me catch that. So I staked it up the other way. I can't remember the size stake I used. I think it's a 13. Yeah, that's a 13. So here I'm fitting the roller table. This is, I think, the most critical fit, the hardest one to make. And here I was trying to get that darn piece of material to rotate as close to center as I could, and I kept playing with it over and over again. There, I got it finally, and it was looking good. And while I had it in that position, I faced off the main collar that I was building, and I'm calling them collars. If you want to call them something else, go ahead. But here I'm measuring it again. It has to be a size 7 millimeters. So again, I'll taper cut this up a bit, And in this case, I want the it to go about a little more than half the actual width of that part, so, or the depth of the part. So I want to go halfway up. So here I'm actually using a marker, and I'll fit it on, and I'll cut a little bit away right where it's not fitting, and then I'll fit it on again, and then I'll use a marker and paint it, and then when I remove the marker, you can see where the line is, and I know that it'll go at least that far. So it's a little trick I picked up, I can't remember where, but, and there's another mark there, and I'll go up to that mark. There we go. And I'm working my way up the collar here, up the shaft, and eventually, this is the hardest part. I'm going to have to make sure that I clean up the part that's next to the larger part of the collar, the larger collar on the left-hand side there. And again, left meaning lower left. As you can see, it's not a perfect left. So here I can see the knobby sticking out, and I'm marking it again and working it on. And you're really got to be patient when you're cutting this part of the balance staff. It takes a long time because you're fitting it and cutting it and fitting it and cutting it. And marking it with a marker there is priceless. You know, I think I'm pretty much good, and I'll look at the top while I'm cutting on the bottom and see if there's any material that's kind of sticking up, right? So I want to get rid of that. So now I think I'm almost there, and I don't want to take any more off after this. I'm just cleaning it up a little tiny bit, do the last fit, and I don't want to take any more off. That's friction fit enough. And I'll be able to pound that on. And again, I'm trying to undercut here to make that surface flat, so when the roller table rides up, it's going to ride up and press right up against that collar, the larger collar. And I'm just trying to get in there with my my tool there to cut the edge, so that doesn't stop the roller table from going up. And I'm measuring it, and I'm measuring what I thought that would be, and it's pretty much there. And I left a little bit for the pivot. And it's funny when you can see it moving in fast speed. You can see it moving just a bit when you press on it. So trying to be gentle, keep your gravers super sharp when you're doing this. And there we go. I'm just trying to work myself up a pivot. And this side, you don't really need an oil groove. It's not necessary to have an oil groove. It looks fancy, but you don't need it. And it's the pivot's going to end up just sticking out of the roller table. And it's a double roller, and it's one piece instead of being two pieces, which I think is good. It's a Swiss watch. It's not a North American watch. And it's made in Switzerland, and let me see if I can find a name of it. So the watch is a Regina watch, and I think that the Swiss industry was making these watches that looked like Walthams and Hamiltons and stuff, but they were made in Switzerland. And they were shipping them up here to Canada, and the jewelers were stuffing them in cases that were likely made in Peterborough, Ontario, and or the U.S., and they were selling them that way. So here I'm working the pivot. Every now and then when I work the pivot, this is for the lower half of the watch, I actually have to take the movement and check it out. So I'm just working that pivot down to the right size. With this Arkansas stone. It's a pretty cool stone, but it's got 90-degree edges, and it's got one edge that's not 90. It's kind of a beveled edge, so you can work it and keep kind of a cone on the balance staff, get that conic look on the balance staff. And here I'm just looking at the staff I made before I know worked, and I'm fitting the jewel in there. I'm actually looking from the other side with my ×15 glasses and cleaning it off and fitting it just to make sure I've got a good tight fit. I shouldn't have said tight fit, I meant a loose fit. I want the side shake to be really proper, but a little tiny bit of side shake. So here I'm taking it off. Then I tested it, and I said, okay, I got to put that back on. So I got myself a stake to help me push it back on, and that helped a lot for centering it. And I was going to work it again. And here I realized that the staff or the pivot was a bit long, and I just looked at the upper part of that collar where the arms of the balance sit, and it was way too high with respect to the bridge. So here I'm just fitting it in and testing it. And this is the upper, so I got the lower one working well, and I was off camera fitting it to make sure it was good. And here I've got that funky looking pivot I'm working on with the Arkansas stone to get it to the right size. And here I can take the actual bounce cock and use that to see how deep that goes in. Now later on I do take this out and use my stereo microscope to make sure that that pivot is actually sinking in through the jewel and hitting the cap jewel. So I'm actually looking from the other side to make sure that it's done. So here the Arkansas stone does give you a nice smooth finish, although I do burnish it later on with my burnisher, and you'll see that in a second. And everything is a ×8 speed, as I was saying. So there it is. That's the it's made, but it's not finished, because I do more work on that upper pivot, the one that looks kind of like a dunce cap. So here I'm working on it again because I realized it was too big, and a lot of work on that pivot. I'm trying to hold the Arkansas stone at an angle. That way I can cut more material that's not the end pivot. So you can see me doing that every now and then. I'll hold that at an angle to cut that, and then I'll try that out again, make sure it's sitting in there. It's just a boatload of work to actually finish the pivots on here. You can use a pivot file, but I find that the Arkansas stone gives me more control over this, and I can get a nicely shaped pivot. I'd like the pivot to be flat as it sits into the jewel, but sometimes it'll remain a bit conic. So here I'm just barely moving this because I've got little dainty work to do on this, and I'm worried that I'll ruin it. So there we go, and it's fitting really nicely. Now I take that out, and that's the burnisher I was using for a second there, and there's the balance staff, and then there's the balance. So I'm going to stake that on. So I end up staking that on. I've made many videos on how to do that. I don't need to show you that. And then after staking that balance on, there was a lot of trial fitting and stuff with the movement itself beforehand, and I make sure that balance was tight, put that in the vise, test it, and then throw it in the watch, and look at that, the darn thing works nice. So thanks for subscribing to my channel. If you've got any watch work for me to do, let me know, and you can contact me at jdwatchservice@gmail.com. jdwatchservice@gmail.com. Please subscribe, please hit like, and I'll see you later.